everybody's afternoon session as a graduate. I certainly didn't see all the papers this morning, but in the 2 sessions I was, or 2.5 sessions I was, I saw some excellent papers. So well done to the presenters. We look forward to a very stimulating final session. But before we get to the final session, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome back to the department Professor Thomas Cousins. His blurb on his Oxford website reads as follows: that he joined the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology in Oxford in 2018. He had studied at UCT and Johns Hopkins, and he's an anthropologist of Southern Africa with a particular interest in health, labor, and kinship, especially nutrition and pharmaceuticals, and their attendant forms of value and life. His fieldwork to date has been in South Africa and is with his PhD on timber plantations and timber plantation labourers in KwaZulu-Natal, and the substances and concepts of health, strength, and life that are constituted in the production of value. So as a lecturer in this department for 5 years, between 2013 and 2017, Thomas was an energetic colleague and collaborator who helped to both extend and transform anthropology in this university. He taught in first, second, and third year, as well as in honours, supervising honours, MA, and doctorate students. He played the major role in securing the Next in Human project and collaborating with others, which is a forerunner to this project. He designed and developed and launched the Health and Development Program in this department. And he was a great citizen. He was an excellent citizen of this department, and his energies are sorely missed. And therefore, we're very happy to have him back. I have a student now that I'm supervising in honours who said Thomas Cousins was the reason that I carried on with this. That Thomas made me think, Thomas gave me the energy to carry on with this. So, and I think there's a few great attributes in that. So, with that, I welcome you. Thomas didn't send me a title before, but I'm sure whatever he says he's going to be engaging, and we're going to let you speak for 45 minutes and then have a little time for questions. Thomas will also be in the final session and at the dinner tonight, so if you don't get to ask questions then, I'm sure the conversations will linger on. He's also in the country for another couple of weeks, so there might be time for that as well. Yankees indicating to the projector. Yeah. The projector needs to be projected.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
So thank you.
Yeah, wow, thanks very much. Thanks, Bernard. That's a bit too glowing, but it's really wonderful to be back, and really appreciate the invitation to come and be part of this student conference. And it's really the most wonderful thing, I think, for a department to have as a graduate student conference. And I really want to thank all of you and applaud all of you for putting your efforts into this. It's when I was a postgraduate student in the US, it was really a highlight to have a community of one's peers that you really thought with and engage each other with. And so I'm very grateful that I've been invited into your space. It's just my home. I feel like it's my former home. It's my current home. So thanks very much for inviting me in. And please just keep an eye on the time for me and tell me I've got a few minutes to go and I'll wrap up. I see you take your melon seriously. I didn't realize how literal. But so, students of what? It's really a thought around what it means to be a student of sociology and anthropology, and it's a reflection on, in some ways, on not so long ago having been a postgraduate student like yourselves, having taught in this department for a few years, and now teaching students at Oxford. And I think there's a question for me, and I'm wondering if you can help me think through this question from your own point of view. So, in coming together in a round like this, to paraphrase Ivor Chipkin, even if only for a short moment, we might become beautiful to each other, to fall in love, to develop a deep horizontal solidarity. So enacting this performance of shared scholarship, of paying critical attention and building convivial modes of thinking and learning together, as Francis Nyandro might say, perhaps we not only build citizenship or democratic love, but also cultivate a shared investment in learning about each other and in each other's worlds. So what can we say about these shared commitments or investments? Commitments to whom or to what? The department, to academia, to South Africa, to the discipline, to your own employment one day, hopefully, to not being an unemployed graduate. I see that's in the news at the moment. Are you a member of a collective that endures, that strives to make some other kind of world possible? What shall we say that we here are students of? Students of what? Should we say, like Obama, that we live in strange and uncertain times? Apparently said that the other day here. When has it not been strange and uncertain? Hashtag Brexit, hashtag Trump, hashtag Ramaphoria, hashtag Day Zero when, hashtag Dalil, hashtag public hearings, hashtag expropriation, hashtag graduate unemployment, hashtag total shutdown, hashtag femicide must fall. These are all the kind of themes that I've been trying to pay attention to the last while. Hashtag Stelly Centenary, apparently you had a nice talk on that yesterday. Hashtag How Talk, do you know about How Talk? Hashtag Anthro So White, hashtag Decolonize Now. So in this talk I want to think with the question students of what, to think about how we might grow what Elizabeth Povinelli and others have called a sociographic approach to projects of the otherwise. That is an orientation to the thick social projects of those who persist despite the violent exclusions that society visits on particular categories of person or on certain forms of life. The term sociography has become fraught with a range of ethical and epistemological investments, some of which I want to draw in here in thinking about my own work, which has been on Amandla and the gut, and now on resistance to a coal mine in KwaZulu-Natal, and also on bird flu and urban animals in Cape Town. And in order to reflect on my own investments or limitations in positionality, and as a way to draw you all into a conversation about the stakes of our efforts to learn something from each other and from the worlds around us. So, what do I mean by towards a sociography of the ontoethics of worldliness? So ontoethics is a term developed by the radical feminist philosopher Elizabeth Gross to get at the ontology of sexual difference rather than through the sort of subjectivity and identity. And I'm inspired by my friend Sylvain Perdigon's thinking with this term ontoethics. So for Elizabeth Gross, sexual difference for her is conditioned by and expressed through relations of space, time, and becoming, as much as it is through subjectivity, identity, consciousness, and the unconscious. So in other words, that social, political, and personal relations are always bound up with broader cosmological frameworks that include not only things, objects, including subjects, but also the conditions under which things are made possible. So space, time, and being and becoming. So you can hear there's a slightly different weighting there on how we might think difference. And to quote her, there is a kind of isomorphism between how we understand our world and how and with what resources we come to understand ourselves. It's in this relation that I see as constituting an ontoethics, an ethics of life lived in a world of difference. So, yeah. I've been inspired by my friend Sylvain Perdigon, as I said, whose work on Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and their practices of relatedness, in which he grounds a reading of political and ethical life in the material, concrete distributions of hope and harm, which is another Povinellian phrase that I quite like. Also this notion of worldliness, which my friend Sylvain has taken from Hannah Arendt, whose writings on the human condition after the devastations of the Holocaust provide many useful concepts for thinking about social difference and of the difficulty of living together with each other and of forging mutual projects and grounding new solidarities with each other. So I'm going to return to this rather strange and difficult, obscure phrase, but first I want to start with a snippet of ethnographic description to set the scene for a question that I've become interested in this move relative from Baltimore to Stellenbosch and now to Oxford, and the different experiences that this has offered me in terms of learning and teaching and researching in these different contexts. So the question is, what do we imagine ourselves to be looking at when we call ourselves students of sociology or anthropology? What are we students of? So indeed, when we're doing what when we look at, what are we doing when we look at, or we think about, or describe, or analyze something? What kind of action is this when we do this work? And then asking about action, especially the actions that are performed, that words perform, that perform through words. This has been a key theme in sociology since at least Weber's time in thinking about social action of one kind or another. And especially I'm thinking with another famous philosopher, J.L. Austin, his text, How to Do Things with Words, and his reception into anthropology through my teacher, Vina Das, and her work on the ordinary, specifically life and words, and Wittgenstein and anthropology. Alongside a longer tradition of critical examination of the discipline of anthropology and in sociology and its techniques and its tropes. So there's a whole range of texts that have been doing this kind of critical work. So the question that I want to pursue, and which I want to ask you to help me think through, and I'd love to hear from you later about this, what are we students of? Students of what? So I know from my time teaching at Stellenbosch that we all struggle, both teachers and students, with a set of nagging doubts about what we could and should be focusing our scholarly attention on, what our proper objects of study are. We argue constantly with each other about how we should go about this or that study, criticizing each other's methods, assumptions, concepts, orientations, citations, politics. Am I to look at a community, a household, a relation, a situation, an institution, or a network, a discourse, a tribe, a village, a suburb, a nation, an economy, a word, a feeling? What are your objects that you work with? Okay, is it a service delivery, political party, or an animal, or technology, infrastructure, capitalism? Should I be a neutral observer, an objective scientist, an activist scholar, a public intellectual? I'm deeply interested in how each of us are thinking about this and what vocabulary we use to talk about this with one another, and in how we draw close to each other or find ourselves drifting apart when we work out these vocabularies with each other. So what is an argument and how do I make one? What are we students of? So my ethnographic little snippet, 21st of August 2017, late last year, before I was getting ready to leave here. It's a sunny and but cool winter's day in northern KwaZulu-Natal, and my assistant in Kosinat and Wabe and I had left a small town of Mtuba at around 9. We drove through Kamsana, the old township of Mtuba, wandering the gravel roads between the Umfolozi River and the growing mountains of rock that have been thrown up by the new mine that's arrived in the last 10 years. So we ran into the Tendele mine entrance by mistake, barricaded and armed with guards, who not so gently returned us to the main road between Mtuba and Hlabisa, putting us out at Somkele, which is the main hub in the Mpumalanga area, traditional authority. So we stopped for lunch at a roadside market, feasting on amagwinya and chicken and pap, while we chatted to the 3 women who were vendors at this market and several old men who were passing the time, who were curious about what we were doing there and what anthropology was. So they were happy to share their views on the mine, and they turned out to be deeply informative of both the geopolitics and economics of minerals and the more local forces shaping their world in late 2017. Boisterous debate took off amongst us. Some of us were against the mine, others realized that this food stall itself had benefited because of the mine. Others pointed out that the blasting noises from the mine were becoming intolerable, as was the dust blowing across the landscape that increasingly coated everything, settled in their water, crept into their lungs. The big bosses just drive past in their fancy cars, they said, sitting in the air-conditioned offices, and they don't experience the dust. Some had just witnessed a rock falling nearby, far from the mine, and it wasn't the first time that falling rock from the blasting had come this close to hitting someone. He said, I wish that stone had landed in my kettle so I could claim some money from the mine. And it's so noisy at night, the noise pollution. So there are huge tensions between those who benefited from being removed from the mine and being compensated, and those who were just outside the mine's footprint and had received nothing. Some people felt they didn't deserve to be given money to rebuild their homes further away because they were facing the same effects. It's just not justifiable how some people got money while others still suffered the effects of noise pollution and dust. So in the midst of this debate, an elderly man began an analysis of the geopolitics of minerals in isiZulu and the dialectics of resistance, laying the blame for their current predicament squarely at the feet of abantu bangaphandle, people from outside, from Australia, from Germany, from India, and their capture of our economy, he said, the JSE, of the growing resistance among residents around the mine. He said, you'll be a group resisting on the same page, and then your leader will be bribed. Automatically the people will be silenced. And then we are told. I place a diamond in your mouth and then you're silenced. That's why the mine went ahead. There would be strikes, but they wouldn't last. And the leader would come back and say, hey, relax, they're nice, only to find out that their leader was bribed. That's what I think happened, he said. And don't forget that many people were eager to move when they hear about the compensation because they wanted to build nice houses for themselves. And I see that the new houses are in fact nicer. Those who haven't used their money wisely are doomed, he exclaimed. 500,000 rand was not enough. More like 6 million, then we'll talk, he said. So this is all unfolding in this very boisterous, dusty, hot, dark roadside stall with laptop, chicken, and pup. So one woman who was selling a Magwinya mentioned how in the old days, when people were forcibly removed for other mines, Ugacha would negotiate with the bosses himself and show the people where they had to move to. Many had been resentful of being told where to go, that they wanted to choose for themselves where they'd live. And dark winds had blown very hard that week, in fact. These three women showed us where the market stall roof had been torn off by a tornado that they all agreed was caused by a Sangoma who was on his way back from the river, twice, with a big snake around his body. The police had found this man unconscious on the side of the road and had contacted other Isangoma to connect him with where he was from. And he'd been put in the back of the van, snake and all, driven to his neighbours, just down the road from the stall, who welcomed him back with a large slaughter to celebrate, which is why there was so much meat in the house. The changing weather, the dust blowing through their hair, the cracks in the buildings from the mine, the snakes and sangomas, threading together, chicken and pup laptops, Zupta critique, disappointment in traditional authority, the dangers of relocation and compensation, all over a dusty mouthful of food on the side of the road in Somkele. And as Kathleen Stewart has shown, the space on the side of the road is encoded by profound poetics and politics of ordinary life, where those often excluded from offering conceptual and political material into worldly and public affairs in their own right reside. What Joao Biel might call ethnography in the way of theory, in which our partners and our interlocutors might be able to speak forcefully or profoundly and take their own place in these ethnographic texts of ours as philosophers in their own right. So this trip that I was telling you about is the start of a project which is boiling along slowly that I've been following in northern KwaZulu-Natal, which began with an interest in the Umfolozi River, which you can see in the bottom left there. With its upper reaches, in fact, are two rivers, the Black Umfolozi and the White Umfolozi, one of which is where Max Gluckman's famous bridge scene unfolded in 1938. And these rivers flow through Umfolozi Park, and they join up just outside the park. This park is made famous by Ian Clay's rhino conservation efforts and his dreaming into pristine African wilderness with African shamans, etc. This river flows through the Mpukanyoni traditional authority, through the mill town of Mtubatuba, along through the sugar flats and Umfolozi flats, and then past Dukuduku, which is now a bursting new scene of urban development, and down to the St. Lucia Lake system, where there's a whole re-engineering of the mouth that's been going on the last few years. So, is this the making of a new social situation, to use Gluckman's term, in which the long durée bumps up against new urgent questions of the Anthropocene, mediating and absorbing histories of racialized dispossession of territory, the effects of extended droughts, and the hoary old tensions of conservation and development, and new fractures in political life? So I didn't really realize at that point yet that the Tendele mine is not only one node in a concatenating network of points, through which a diffuse network of discourses, concerns, histories, and aspirational horizons are coming into formation. So this thinking with the mind, looking through the mind, I found has been an increasingly powerful lens to see what's being refracted both locally and globally, a tangle of contemporary dilemmas to do with job creation, energy production, economic growth, ecological functioning, multi-species well-being, wilderness, conservation, land restitution, customary law, land tenure. These are all terms which discursively are circulating. I don't take any of them as my own analytical terms, but they're words that we encounter in public life, and we have to think about what they might mean. But these words are kind of floating together across these fragile assemblages and momentary patches, to use an Tsing word, that tangle around the mind, which has forcefully thrown up for me this question, students of what? What am I studying here? What is the object of my concern here? So this is northern KwaZulu-Natal. It's about 3 hours north of Durban, just west of the small town of Mtubatuba, on the R618 to Hlabisa. as it passes, just before it passes through the Stellenbosch Park, you find the Tendela open cast mine. There you go. It's been operating in Somkele since 2007. So that's the river mouth engineering project that I was telling you about. Okay, so these are the mining areas just to the southeast of the Stellenbosch Park. It's the largest mine in South Africa of metallurgical anthracite, which is an energy-intensive type of coal. Since its inception, it's generated heated debate about the benefits of its promises of jobs for rural residents adjacent to the mine. Over the last decade, it's displaced several thousand people who've been compensated by the mine for the destruction of their homes to rebuild new houses in adjacent Izugodi, or local areas. And over the last 5 years in particular, this has generated intense debate amongst residents of the Mkhanyakuda district municipality and the intersecting Mpukunyoni traditional authority about the relative benefits and burdens of the mine. A number of civic groups have formed, some of whom demand better compensation from the mine for housing, for schools, for services, others for better terms of employment, resisting the extension of the mine into new areas, displacing even more people from territory, wreaking more destruction of the land and the environment, so putting in question the constitutive materials required for life of water, air, earth, space. And in fact, the very kind of fabric of life-affirming relations between all these elements. So the blasting continues. It destroys. Informally, researchers at the nearby Health and Demographic Research Centre in Somkele, which I won't name, have told me that they have fine-grained, geolocated population data that shows just how much of an impact the mine has had on rates of HIV transmission, trauma injuries, respiratory diseases. Data that they're terrified to publish, not least because of the ethical conundrum of revealing the sexual networks brought into being by the mine, but also because the mine has the blessing of the Zulu king, on whom the demographers depend for the permission to continue conducting HIV and demographic surveillance. So in 2015, Bongani Pierce founded the Mpukunyoni Community Property Association, the MCPA. Not legally a CPA as imagined by the Community Property Associations Act of 1996, but as a cunning maneuver to outsmart the Mpukunyoni Traditional Authority, whom he saw as in cahoots with the Tendela mine managers and owners, and the Mtuba municipality, but to the detriment of the ordinary people of Mpukunyoni, who had no say in whether they wanted the mine or not, and no say in whether they wanted to be removed or not, relocated. Mr. Pierce has led fierce protests at the gates of the mine, blockading coal trucks, mobilizing in every Izigodi around the mine. William Kondo is from Fuleni. He's not in this picture here. Which is on the other side of the Mfolozi River, just south, where he and others have formed the Mfolozi Community Environmental Justice Organization, or PEJO, to organize around the planned Fuleni mine, which is not yet built, but might be coming. And he and others are supported by Sheila Berry, who's a retired Jungian analyst and now of the Global Environmental Trust, along with groundwork and a range of intersecting national and global campaigns, such as Keep the Coal in the Hole and the Mining Environmental Justice Community Network of South Africa, Centre for Environmental Rights, and interestingly, the Kolobeni anti-mining resistance groups as well. So right now, there's another student from WITS who's being supervised by Rogers Oric, called Sibahle Ndwayana, who I'm helping, who's right now in Myeki, one of the Izigodi just next to this mine. He's conducting fieldwork for his master's in anthropology design. And he told me just yesterday that there hasn't been any water here for the last 7 weeks. The mine apparently sucks out the water, sucks out all the water out of the river. And the Jozini Dam, which is a little bit too far away to regularly supply the taps in this area. The municipal taps themselves have run dry. Last year when I was doing fieldwork here, I was starting to learn about the various informal boreholes that are being sunk, that have been sunk for many years in these areas. So the water table and available water is a serious, critical issue. Sibahle was telling me that the blasting continues every day, the siren going off at 12 o'clock. The dust blows into everyone's water tanks, covers every surface. Cracks grow across people's walls. And grazing land is diminishing and being turned foul by the dust. The mine increasingly dominates popular consciousness as a lurid nightmare, promising jobs in a thirsty land while taking away homes, territory, memory, the ground of all being. More and more residents of Mpukunyoni are beginning to doubt the promises of development, of jobs, of housing, held out by the mine, and worry about the looming Fulani mine being planned just on the other side of the Mfolozi on the South Bank. The new planned mine, Ibuto coal mine, which I think actually has been bought by another company, will also be open cast, threatening to dislocate 16,000 homes, and even closer to the Mfolozi Park. Rangers there are worried about the crocodiles and hippos in the adjacent wilderness area, which are apparently very sensitive to the vibrations caused by the blasting. A new bridge is being planned for the Mfolozi, just over here in fact. So, and to help get the coal from this side out through the existing coal roads around the Tendele mine. And maybe it's time for a new, what do you call it, analysis of the social situation in modern Zululand to quote Latin. For those already displaced and compensated, a key bone of contention is the inadequacy of the compensation of for relocation of graves. Originally, the mine offered 35,000 rand for each grave and a beast, and then it was changed to 8,000 rand and a beast for each grave, and then 8,000 rand for all the graves in the homestead and no beast. Several hundred graves are now gathered together in one graveyard, loosely fenced together. Not only is it offensive for people here that so many graves jostled together, undifferentiated and inadequately marked, but there's no ritual process, or there hasn't yet been, to alert Abapansi, those in the ground, that they were being moved. The crucial gestures and words were overlooked, and the vital materials have been unavailable. No umhlaba wenkosi, branch of the buffalo thorn tree that leads Amadlozi, the ancestors, and shows them the way. No bellowing of slaughtered beasts, and the appropriate distribution of choice cuts of meat. Kirsten Ewens and Johan Lorenzen are two environmental lawyers who've taken on the pro bono work of representing claimants, seeking redress for loss of territory and inadequate compensation. And they're now wondering about whether there's a case to be made for claiming compensation for, quote, loss of culture. To what extent do the graves, the ground, the space, the locatedness of an existential claim to shared personhood depend on this fragile network of, or ecology of signs, symbols, materials, capacities, potentialities, in order for a claim to be staked? But the question this raises is a claim to what? Against what history? Against what horizon of possibility? What concept of justice? What grounds of identity? So you see again the question of students of what? In some ways, the Tendele mine, along with the struggles on the Wild Coast, the Platinum Belt, and other struggles over mineral sovereignties, reflects a growing national outcry over minerals, customs authorities, land reform, and the struggles over redress for historical injustice. Claims to alternative sovereignties, creating jobs and nurturing livable environments. This is just last week's Mail and Guardian. Land reform activists and scholars are particularly anxious at the moment about how the national politics will play out over the coming year. And they depend on people like Bongani Pierce, Billion Polo, Shida Berry, Kirsten Ewens, Donna Hornby, and Nikki Claassen, and Long Seni Butelezi, among others, to collate the evidentiary basis on which broader political strategies can be built. Land is, for me, land is a tricky one for obvious reasons, but I think it's only one analytic through which these struggles for life take shape. Beyond it, through these discursive and symbolic struggles over land and memory and the distributions, the material, concrete distributions of hope and harm, to use this Pavanellian phrase again, that late liberal governance instantiates, lies this thick tangle of what I'm drawing from Pavanelli and others, this notion of social projects. I like the phrase because it draws us explicitly away from easy appeals to an idea of, say, community or home or even tribe, for that matter. But social projects emerge in particular actions, particular ways of doing things together. So maybe strategies, tactics, effort, endurance. This effort to draw together the conditions for persisting and thriving despite the given arrangements and categories forged by what we might call liberal thought, these categories of liberal thought. For example, the self, the subject, the community, the nation, etc. So I'll come to this in a moment, but I'm trying to think with this term sociography, particularly also then because it's a way of bracketing the sort of what we might think of as the natural objects of either sociology or anthropology. We're going to study society or the market or communities or traditions or customs. That sociography makes explicit the effort of writing the kind of experimental writing techniques required in order to bring these forms of life into being. To quote Pavanelli, sociography is a way of writing the social from the point of view of social projects. But this way of writing ethnographically or sociographically also presupposes, this is her words, an entire corpus of previous and projected writerly projects. So it's very much a nod towards that 1980s writing turn and all of the critique that came out of that. How do we take seriously the concrete worlds beyond our writing, but still very much aware of the kind of qualifications that writing imposes on our descriptions. So this story that I gave you of shared amagwinya and chicken laptops and an old man's tipsy diatribe on the disappointments of the new forms of mineral sovereignty is an important one, not simply because it provides a lens into an emerging national and global contest over territory, or the rights of corporations and kings to dislocate people from their homes, or the entanglements of conservation and claims to custom, but also because working through shared alimentation, taking the belly, isisu, or le ventre in French, as Jean-François Bayat famously called it in his Politics of the Belly, or the gut, as I'm starting to call it, as a central modality through which to acknowledge and trace relations and concepts. It feels more appropriate for me because of the kinds of issues that I'm working with here. Some of you know that I've been interested over the last few years in thinking through what I call this anthropology of the gut. Coming from my fieldwork in northern KwaZulu-Natal on a nutrition intervention that was being piloted and rolled out in 2008-2009 in the timber plantations around Mtuba, and I was starting to notice the various substances ingested by timber plantation labourers, both ordinary food and extraordinary supplements and medicines. I've tried to follow the tendencies, our tendencies, in both ordinary speech and anthropological analysis to switch between more literal modes of speech and description and more metaphorizing modes of thought and gesture. So really what I'm trying to get at is our own capacity to obscure when our words are meant to be more concrete or when more symbolic. Our own confused desires to indicate that which is more natural or that which is artificial or man-made. So the gut is precisely this a certain kind of boundary object between inside and outside, self and other, that slips and slides between supposedly cultural elaborations of a purportedly natural object and sort of practices of everyday life. So in the years that I've completed my initial fieldwork in 2010, the gut has emerged as a frontier of cutting-edge science in genomics, metabolomics, biochemistry, and epigenetics, not to mention the target of new forms of venture capital, speculating on and bootstrapping new biomarkers into global therapeutic economies and archipelagos of interventional science in the pursuit of what Joe Dumit has called surplus health. Here's one example of the strange new these relationships between philanthropy, global health, big pharmaceuticals, micro-infrastructure, nutraceuticals. Evolve Biosystems, which is a privately held microbiome company in Davis, California, normally advertises Ervivo, the infant probiotic product, to young millennial mothers in the West. It is now partnering with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is interested in how Ervivo might help infants who suffer from severe acute malnutrition, obviously not in the West, other parts of the world, and how probiotics might help malnourished children in developing countries to absorb nutrients and avoid infection. Venture capital, in other words, is seeking to monetize the human microbiome, establishing new assemblages with the 100 trillion organisms found in the gut, which perform vital functions from synthesizing vitamins to aiding digestion to helping the immune system develop. They're betting that interventions to restore the composition of the microbiome might help with the treatment and prevention of severe acute malnutrition, which affects 16 million children and kills 3 million each year. So part of my interest in thinking with the critique of the gut has been to see if a different political somatic perspective might emerge from getting some distance from the Euro-American medieval tradition of seeing the head as the sovereign, the locus of thought and action, and the belly, as Aesop's fable would have it, as the center of popular sentiment, sometimes selfish, greedy, sometimes the great redistributor, the mediator of social and political life. It is so powerfully dramatized in Shakespeare's play Coriolanus. This is the more recent film version, which is very fun. You should go watch it. So from the unreliability of gut feelings, which is what Stephen Colbert might call truthiness, to the history of quack cures banned by various colonial governments to operate on the gut to augment one's amandla as both social capacity and political possibility, to the new epigenetics and microbiology of the gut, I found that this image of the gut, the ventre, isisu, maag, belly, to be a material semiotic that offers a thread stitching a seam between personal and collective, between subjects and citizens, individuals and populations, between late liberalism and projects of the otherwise. Does the gut as an analytic and as an object get us closer to ordinary experience, to the zeitgeist, to the ethical and political challenges of our times? I'm not sure. Students of what? David Pratton's essay on African anthropology is having three aspects. Lends itself well to this thinking, I think, with thinking with and through the belly, isisu, le ventre. Retroversion, looking back at the history of the discipline. Oh, sorry, I'll come to that in a moment. So David Pratton's essay talks about retroversion, extroversion, and introversion. So retroversion, just looking back at the history of the discipline and its colonial legacy. Introversion, turning itself inside out, examining its core assumptions and tropes, problematizing the politics of knowledge production. And then extroversion, which is a term from Jean-Francois Bayat as well, in which he was talking about how Africans have actively participated in the processes that created the continent's dependent position within the global system. So Bayat's classic text on the politics of the belly is about the propensity of politicians to hoard and greedily consume resources and things and people. In addition to highlighting the significance of idioms of eating in the belly to African conceptions of power, Bayat's analysis insists on the importance of vertical relationships, those between social unequals, such as patrons or clients, to understand African political history. But so I'm suggesting that in thinking through the gut, and not Bayat's le ventre, the belly, as a problematic, as an impure boundary object that emerges as a technique from my fieldwork, as a site of action and thought, only through and within these colonial histories of labor, these heavy labor regimes like in the timber plantations. But now also we find it again in these post-colonial techno-scientific archipelagos of venture capital-driven, philanthropic, speculative, experimental logics. That verticality is no longer the topology of the body politic. It's assembled, networked, patched, platformed, morphed, subject to torsion, as a critical site through which social projects of becoming otherwise are composed, placed at stake. So to return to Somkele and those protesting against the Tendele mine, the members of Mpejo and MCPA who lean into these available liberal languages of wilderness conservation or continuity of cultural practice, say, communication with ancestors, I don't think they're making naive claims to the existence of community or as an undifferentiated natural political subject. And they're also not really speaking in this hyper-reflexive sort of Parvenelian language of the cunning of recognition. And they're not sort of romantically philosophizing on the ontological difference between rocks and tribes. But the question that comes up for me is what is at stake in these partial and fragmentary assertions about the importance of graves, the correct gestures, rituals, animals, rivers, waters, hills, grazing, these rocks. So these singular and local and specific arrangements of rocks and trees and hills and graves and cattle and words and memories and stories and persons, they're disassembled or deconstituted and redistributed by means of the mind, for example, in these post-apartheid commitments to constitution and custom, to job creation, electricity supply. Then what forms of life can persist or endure after the dust of these rearrangements has settled? Can we have coal mining, jobs, Kusile and Wadipa power stations, and crocodiles, and graves, and grazing, and custom, all coexist together in the comforts of the liberal governance of difference? I suspect not. Not all ontologies are created equal, goes the critique of liberal political economy. By what means are these opposing claims to existence to be adjudicated? On what ethico-political grounds are these struggles to be waged? This is a real question because the activists are trying to mount a court case. People are being removed from their homes right now. Blasting continues. And there are real questions about consultation and decision-making processes between residents who live in Pukunyoni, traditional authority, the Nkosi, and the king, all of whom have slightly different perspectives and placed differently. So it's here that the concern with social projects, with these efforts to bring into being alternative worlds, the otherwise, joins together two strong ontological questions, such as, for example, what's the difference between a rock and a tribe? Brings together these ontological questions with writerly questions about how do we describe these projects. So what we're calling sociography, which, as I said earlier, is trying to bracket any kind of easy notion of society as somehow existing independently of our efforts to describe the world of these liberal political thoughts. How do we take the social as a question rather than as a given? So the question, students of what, has been for me a way of denaturing our commitments to any particular discipline or concept or method, and of taking on board, I'm calling these thick onto-ethical efforts of wording the world from within the projects of those with whom we stake our existence. So sociography and social projects, I think, are two sides of this coin, of this question that I'm posing. Students of what? Sociography as the epistemological challenge of positive critique, as Pavnelli calls it, and social projects as ontologies on the move, as things coming into being in action. So at the intersection of these two threads, the politics of citation is critical, I think. And I don't know if you've been following the How Talk controversy online, on Twitter mostly, but there's this fantastic blog piece by Jules Weiss, who suggested that we need to think of punking the gift of citation. It's a very nice kind of thought. It basically means how do we cite scholars who are more conventionally sort of excluded from these big journals, who are not necessarily the kind of at the big universities in the global north, but how do we think with people outside of the academy, our interlocutors? How do we cite them in these kind of scholarly ways? So I want to finish with a quote from my friend Sylvain Pédigon that I mentioned earlier, who's writing about these onto-ethics of worldliness has been particularly inspiring for me. So let me read this long quote, if you'll indulge me, and then I'll finish up. So, by onto-ethics of worldliness, this is Sylvain writing, I mean for now a broad but specific register of the ethical life anchored in a sense or a hunch that the self's relation to the world could and should be more admirable, more far-reaching, more wittingly reciprocal than it is at present. Such an ethics presupposes an original orientation to self and world that does not see their consociation as fixed, but rather apprehends both of them as unfinished and co-emergent. It also entails the apprehension of a tendency running counter to this orientation in the human self, a disposition to be out of kilter with the world, or a comfort found in a state of relative alienation from it. To be sure, the type of incipient striving towards worldliness that I'm painting here, this is Sylvain speaking, right? With broad strokes can be and has been interpreted, intensified and socially absorbed through very diverse and at times divergent configurations of ethical life. In the Euro-American philosophical tradition, many will associate the concept of worldliness with the major and quite distinct elaboration that's received in the 20th century in the thought and writings of Hannah Arendt. Worldliness is, in one of her commentators' words, what Arendt prizes most, that of which the ever-increasing impracticability informs her critical diagnosis of the modern age, and that of which the Restoration orients her political and moral theory. For Arendt, worldliness anchors itself as the highest pursuit in the existential condition of natality, the naked fact of one's appearance into being, which presupposes an immanent power to appear, and thus also the appearingness of other beings who are recipients of my appearance. Every living entity's appearance, in this Arendtian sense, is an ontological event that makes sensible in the present an as yet indeterminate future in which this entity will have been seen and heard and otherwise pulled out of the darkness of sheltered existence by other entities it will have similarly grasped and engaged in various ways. This material semiotic play of appearances is what Arendt called the world, which thus emerges and lies in her formulation in between the entities that appear to each other. So it's quite a dense philosophical formulation, but trying to find a conceptual founding for how it is that beings come into relationship with each other. And it's I suppose it echoes a kind of Levinasian concept of the face of the other. You encounter the other, and one then comes to know oneself. It's a concept that someone like Judith Butler has written a lot about. So, I think it's not merely a question of natality, so I guess I'm speaking back to Sylvain here, of the naked fact of appearance before another, but rather of drawing the world into a mutually staked question of recognition and affordance, and of acknowledgement of brutal histories and their legacies in settler colonial contexts, namely the continuing structuration of potential that gives current ontological weight to histories of racial oppression, sexual violence, or the immiseration of whole classes and categories of persons. I think we have strong African concepts to think with in forging new solidarities in our various social projects. Harry Garuba's appreciation of animism and African modernities is one that I'm drawn to. Francis Nyamjo's careful elucidation of an ethic of conviviality. Achille Mbembe's critique of black reason, or Njabula Ndebele's now old rediscovery of the ordinary, and also Zolani Ngwani's approach to local social subjectivities, or Carolyn Hamilton's Tribing and Untribing in the 500-year archive project. So once more, students of what? I want to offer this question as a tool by means of which we can ask each other inside the academy and outside with a capacious generosity about what really matters, what arrangements are existentially at stake, what counts as an object of study, what counts as an ethical and political relation to our interlocutors and comrades. I'm interested to hear your own response to these abiding questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for a stimulating and incredibly well-grounded intervention and keynote. As we usually do at the seminar, can take a few questions, a few thoughts. Thomas came from Tygerberg and was a bit late, so but we do have tea after this, so I think we can probably go on for about 10 to 15 minutes. But as I say, conversations can continue. So please, any thoughts, comments, questions? Shall we?
Thanks, Thomas. I think I can process all of it. There's no hold anymore. We listen to you.
Yeah.
No hold. This is a series of relations and horizontal. So I want to ask you maybe. I think push you a bit. Is this question you're asking, what now? What do we do? Students of what?
Mm-hmm.
Not somehow also kind of a byproduct of this shift, right? There's a shift in theory from the vertical power to horizontal that you mentioned, from linear kind of reasoning and argumentation to assemblage, to almost, so the idea of assemblage, right? It's an endlessly relational becoming. So we're thinking about it a lot like in our class, the question of the frame. The whole question will just be a simple way to think about it, the frame. What is the frame? Where do you stop? How close? How far? So, okay, so there's no real question. So maybe that's the question.
Yeah.
Before, people would think about your theory is your frame, and to apply to the world the way you look at the world. This new kind of approach of relationality, like almost a radical relationality, right? It's extreme. And on top, assemblage is kind of breaking that up because it could be so many different frames and so many different, I don't know, exactly. So, how do you relate that? Maybe you can think more about that. How does your question relate to maybe the old way? The old way was thinking about the frame, and now we're trying to think about it. It seems the same problem.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's a great question, and in some ways, you're right. It echoes with an older critique of grand narratives, a kind of moment from the 80s, and the writing turn through a kind of postmodern turn in which there was no big theory, and I think in many ways social. What do you want to call it? I don't want to call it social theory because I'm critical of that notion, but in some ways that hyper horizontal kind of if we put it under the label postmodern for now in a sort of negative sense, I think in some ways we moved on from that, in the sense that well, not that we've forgotten it, but in the sense that we have to contend with real relations of power, and so probably now more than ever those although I may be gesturing towards these kind of assemblages and these patches. I think the people who are thinking with assemblage and patches at the moment, like Pavanelli and Singh, etc., are not. They're not against trying to take on board these kind of what we might call both the sort of vertical kind of questions of power, which are pressing, but also the kind of existential crises that these inaugurate of the kind of the idea of the end of habitable Earth for humans, for example, and not merely that, but a kind of radically unequal distribution of the impact of say, environmental destruction. The effects of say environmental destruction are visited on particular categories of people. So in a sense, it's not either or. It's not that we are against a big concept or a big theory, but it's about taking our inspiration from taking on board strong critiques of say colonialism and of the very problematic histories of knowledge production. How do you take that on board in establishing these kind of social projects with those who have been radically excluded or radically violated by these same histories of liberal thought? Now, I also want to just sort of put right in there quickly that this kind of critique of liberal thought starts to sound quite strange in the context of Trump and Brexit, and I'm quite interested in that. And people like Latour are writing about, oh gosh, I didn't realize that my critique of knowledge was going to render this kind of post-truth world that we're in. So I think we have to take it very, very seriously. I'll leave it there. Thanks. Yeah.
I see Yankees hand. I see Rob's hand. I've got a question. Are you willing to do the old thing and take because
It's more democratic.
it's about time.
As you wish. As you wish.
Are you able to do that? Okay, because I've seen lots of, in fact, quite a lot of hands now. So Yankee and Rob are the first two, and then.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. I just came from the SASA conference, and somebody said something that I really found very profound. Somebody said, history does not say goodbye to us.
Yeah.
It says, till we meet again. Coming back to your question about students of what?
Yeah.
I'm thinking here, perhaps before we've been asked the question about students of what, we need to ask ourselves the question as to who's supposed to be a student. Because when you look at historians will tell you about the role that the chiefs played when mining started in South Africa. That somehow you were complicit to this project of land disposition by virtue of like the way you explain how the chief, how Gaita, how Soletini in this project have actually conducted themselves. And it seems like the country, the people have not really learned from that history. That we tend to be repeating our history has now come back and says, look, what we did 300 years ago, now we are doing it now. So how should we go about perhaps asking questions about the role of the chiefs in democracy? Because it seems to me that the line that divides the role of the chiefs and the role of state and governance as we understand it from a liberal perspective, it seems like that line has not actually been we have not actually separated the lines. It seems to me that it's been bled. So we need to somehow ask ourselves the question as to whether what kind of society are we to tolerate this kind of injustice, especially interpreted by the people whom we regard as authority in a society like the chiefs. Do we need to check them out and say they don't have a space anymore in democracy? Or do we need to perhaps go back and say, well, we're missing something from our constitution because we've given too much power to these people and this is what they're doing to us? And how do we challenge them through these democratic processes that we have?
It's a great question. So you may carry on, Ron, Lord. Okay.
Sorry. Rob.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Just to the last point about Trump, I was thinking about Trump as you were talking, and particularly in relation to the guts and the kind of head and the belly, Trump's belly, and the kind of, and the appeals that Trump makes through his belly in a way, that's through the guts. Believe me, he keeps on saying these talks, as if we can identify with him through the guts, and someone feeling, and so kind of, I mean, I was also thinking, yesterday we had this discussion around transformation, and four speakers were speaking in quite emotional terms, about transformation and what's, the kind of situation we're at the moment, and how people are still interdicted 2 years after and nothing's happened, and these kind of things, and the anger and the importance of sort of, I mean, it feels like to me that on the one hand you're trying to argue it in a way for a way of intellectualizing which is grounded in the culture, which is informed by emotions, and so I can understand it from a very progressive point of view, but at the same time it's also worrying as well, the way that Trump is kind of.
That's a great point. Yeah, I've got some thoughts about that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So I think I'm just going to let the questions go, and you're going to answer what you can, because there's a few. There's Annie, there's Stephen, and
yeah, that's fine.
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, thanks, Thomas.
Michelle.
Thanks, Thomas. Very interesting paper. I have maybe, difficult question that I don't quite know how to phrase it, but I wanted to ask, so how does sociography distinguish itself from ethnography in a sense? And is there a distinction, if there is a distinction, and what does that kind of distinction, what would it hold for sort of anthropology and practice and writing in the postcolonial wherever we are now? I don't know, but predominantly from Africa, because of the history between ethnography and Africa.
It's a great question. Yeah, thanks.
No, thanks very much, Thomas. There's an enormous amount to think about, and so just following a thread. Unfortunately, it's a Trump thread. I mean, the tour story is precisely if we unpack things so much, and there's no truth. Science is open-ended and endlessly contested, and it's fluid essentially. Then you realise the right wing deploy that precisely to destabilize the idea of climate change. The science is not conclusive yet. So in that context, we've got Trump, Bannon, fascism, right-wing, strident confidence, and also commonsensical political gestures, speaking from the gut and all that. So it's a very difficult one to think through, because you can't retreat to some naive notion of we have a clear counter position to what the alt-right are doing. And that's not what we're meant to be doing, but somehow it's part of what we're trying to grapple with. It is this world that we live in. And let me leave it there. I mean, I don't know what to make of it.
Real questions.
So Thomas and I have an ongoing debate. I don't think it's quite resolved because the elements that Thomas laid out towards the end of the presentation, that there are these tensions in this community, and that they're very real, and they can't sit together, right? They can't coexist. That they're antagonistic, and that they reflect deep power relations, deep inequalities. I share totally with him, and I'm sympathetic deeply to that, and as well as the brilliant ethnography, how you've drawn it out. I wonder if it's that quick, if we can that quickly assume or accept the abandonment of the social. I wonder if indeed that the whole thing, and as you were gesturing, as Rose been gesturing, the whole moment of saying there's multiple truths, that everything's an assemblage, that we all have contingent relations, and we set that up like that, is not somehow adequate to a social moment of financial capital. It's not adequate to a social moment in which, I'm not saying it's a crudely derived. I think, of course, we have to navigate our way through life. Of course, we have contingent relations. Of course, there are multiple truths at some level, but those are adequate to a moment that's is already grounded in the social. So, it's a philosophical difference or theoretical difference, even though I think we share politics. And so I'm curious to push back on that.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's a political question, even though we share philosophical sympathies.
Okay.
I think one of the threads, starting with Yankee's, one of the things I picked up in your comment, Yankee, was the kind of old Foucauldian phrase: "Society must be defended," and in a sense, I think that for me the point is not to come down simply on the side of yes society or no, or yes the social and no society, in whatever freighting we give those terms. I think the point which is actually brilliantly thought through in Povinelli's final chapter on positive critique. So if I can sort of telegraph quickly through a set of concepts, but one of Povinelli's sort of lines of thinking is around, well, if we get all so critical, we're so Foucauldian, and we just criticize everything all the time, what are you for? Why don't you articulate a positive vision? And when she gives us this story of from Ursula Le Guin of the ones who walk away from Omelas, we don't know where they're walking to. Those who leave the citadel, which is the sort of liberal, perfect kind of governance, at the heart of which is the child in the broom closet. We don't know where these others are walking away to. And in a sense, it's Povinelli has this image of those who sit just outside the door of late liberal governance, and it's in that sense that I think we want to think in this tension politically and ethically, and also how do we write about these things? The epistemological question of we want to hold open the space for becoming otherwise, not for a world in which there is no politics. Yes, we must sharpen the politics, as Povinelli would say, but the terms on which we receive something like society, let's just put in square brackets there. At one point there was this big distinction made between society versus the social, precisely to highlight these kind of differences of political engagement around what we take to be an ontological object. Does society exist independently of the old Durkheimian notion that there is this thing called society? If we go with that, then what other concepts do we become committed to? What other politics do we become committed to? And in some ways, I'm very much sympathetic to this problem that we're thinking through of, we did critique of liberal thought, and now look, we're in this fascist moment. I think that's a false binary. I think I mean, I understand where it comes from, but in a way, I'm suddenly reminded of this. The Americans at the moment are very excited by what's this young woman who's been elected in New York. She holds out this promise of radical socialist politics in the US. Yeah. In some ways, and sort of resistance to thinking, oh well, of course there's not going to be a socialist future in America. I think we need to. Personally, I feel part of what gives us a certain kind of us in the room here in South Africa, a certain kind of sharpness to our critique is that we are thinking very much with the conditions of this place, which with this very problematic history, with the forms of liberal governance that we have been struggling for and trying to instantiate, but very much aware of the critique of that form of liberal governance. I think that's important to maintain that tension. So, just quickly, one or two other things between all these fantastic questions that you posed. Rob, you're absolutely right. You're putting your finger on this problem of intellectualizing the sort of center of feeling in a way. The person that I'd really love to read around this is a woman called Elizabeth Wilson, who's written a great book called Psychosomatic, and then a more recent book called Gut Feminism. And she's specifically trying to think through a history of feminist thought about the body, in which what happens if we were to take the somatic, the body, very seriously as a site in which thinking and feeling and memory is rooted through the gut. And that's a kind of rereading of Freud and of this new microbiome kind of neuropsychoneuroenterology. On the other side, there's people like Bill Connolly, political philosopher, not the comedian, who very much trying to understand what people like John Stewart and Colbert are sort of pointing to when they talk about truth in this. Exactly this formation of American cultural thought that you can go with your gut feeling, and we have to get with it in the sense of to understand exactly how that works, because it, in a sense, it puts pressure on that liberal, rational form of public deliberation, which is exactly what has delivered us into this kind of crisis, as it were. So I think for me the route through that is to say, let's take the body very seriously, let's take feelings very seriously, let's think about them, but let's also feel them, and let's find ways of acting with feeling, with passion, and with reflection. And I think there are a range of literatures that can support us, and examples and practice of how that might work. So I think that's a great point. And then Annie's point about the difference between sociography and ethnography. I think part of what's at stake there is just emphasizing that when making a point about saying, in the tradition of anthropology, when we talk about ethnography, we assume certain kinds of natural objects of the study of anthropology, whether it's family or clan or tribe or whatever the kind of problematic history is. And sociography doesn't take any of that for granted. So it's about the not taking for granted in this new kind of, which some people have read that through Latour and assemblage, but there is methodologically. But I think sociography takes that methodological impulse and routes it through a much stronger kind of political and epistemological rendering to say, let's think about when we write about the social projects of becoming otherwise, that we don't take for granted any of these categories, which either anthropology as a discipline or the categories of liberal thought have delivered to us about what is community, what is society, what is the household, what is the family, etc. Yeah. Stephen, I don't know what the answer is, except I think I've touched on it a moment ago.
Okay. Well, the seashore has a hand, but
so you did doubtful the whole time.
But unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring this to an end because, and I'm going to have to beg for your indulgence for just 5 minutes for tea and coffee, and then reconvening at 6 minutes. Reconvening here next door for the final sessions. I'd like to invite you to give Thomas a very big hand.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks. That was good. I don't know what the answers are. So when are you coming back?
Sorry?
When are you coming back?
Yeah, I'm back on the 15th.
Okay.
And you? When are you leaving?
Well, on the 16th we go to Wilderness for a week, and then the day after that we go.
So it won't
Somewhere there,
No, I get back on the night of the 15th, so and to see you in Oxford.
When are you coming?
No, I'm not.
Oh, come, no, please come. No, really. If you're ever passing through Europe,
Right.
I'm sure I can get a ticket paid from somewhere central to Oxford if you want to come get a tour.
Okay, no, that's
And
yeah, that'd be nice.
There's both the department, but there's also the South African session, which is also fabulous. And so there's various forums. It would be fabulous to have you come.
Yeah,
So,
okay.